Martin thought killing my little in-house automation would make him look decisive. One Friday afternoon, he ordered me to shut it off and put our telecom account activations back on manual processing because, in his words, I don't trust black boxes I didn't approve. 12 weeks later, that sentence was projected on a screen in the Quarterly Business Review, right above a vendor quote for $1.2 million a year to rebuild the exact thing he had thrown away for free. He was sitting 2 chairs from me when the finance director asked why one email had created a backlog, SLA penalties, overtime, an outsourcing emergency, and a 7-figure annual cost. He reached for his water and missed the glass. Here's how a free tool became the most expensive thing our new head of compliance ever touched. Before we go any further, thank you for being here. Drop a comment and tell me where you're watching from. A quick note: some details have been changed for storytelling, but the emotions and the workplace logic at the heart of this are real. If you've ever watched someone break a working system just to prove they were in charge, you'll understand why I kept every email. The room where Martin finally understood what he'd done was called Blue Ridge, which sounded nicer than it was. It was a long conference room on the 4th floor with a wall of windows, a coffee machine that made everything taste like cardboard, and a projector that always needed 3 tries before it found the right input. That morning, every chair was full. Finance, operations, customer experience, legal, compliance. The steering committee was there too, which meant the kind of people who usually sent questions through assistants had decided to ask them in person. I sat near the wall with my laptop closed and my hands folded on top of it. That was deliberate. If I opened the laptop, Martin would accuse me of performing. If I looked nervous, he would feed on it. So I sat there like I was waiting for a bus. Priya from finance sat at the table, 2 seats from the screen. She had one of those slim gray notebooks accountants carry when they already know the answer and are just waiting for someone else to catch up. She didn't look at me when the meeting started. That was also deliberate. Martin came in 3 minutes late. He always came in 3 minutes late once he got promoted. Not late enough for anyone to call him out, just late enough to make people look up when he entered. He wore a navy suit that didn't fit his shoulders and carried no notebook, no folder, no laptop bag. Just a phone and a stainless steel water bottle. He nodded at the VP of operations like they were equals, sat down, and said, "Sorry, back to back. Let's make this efficient." No one answered him. Then Priya clicked to the first slide. The title was simple: Activation Operations Variance. Q2 Review. Martin leaned back. He still thought this was going to be about staffing. He thought he could blame my team, blame the old process, blame customer volume, blame anything except the decision that had started the whole mess. What he didn't know yet was that Priya had built the deck from his own words, not summaries, not hearsay, his actual emails. But to understand why that mattered, I have to go back to the Friday he killed the tool. I worked for a mid-sized telecom back office in Columbus. We were not the people who sold internet or cable or business phone packages. We were the people who made the sold thing actually turn on. When a salesperson promised a small business that their new fiber account would activate by Monday, my group was one of the quiet teams behind the promise. Officially, my title was Senior Process Engineer. Unofficially, I was the person everyone called when something got stuck between 3 systems that hated each other. Sales put in an order through one portal. Billing created the account in another. Provisioning pushed the services to the network. Customer care saw a 4th screen that lagged behind the other 3 by anywhere from 5 minutes to 2 hours. If you think that sounds fragile, you're right. It was like trying to get 4 people to sing the same song when none of them had the same lyrics. Before the automation, activating a standard small business account took a human being between 6 and 12 minutes, assuming nothing was wrong. That doesn't sound like much until you multiply it by hundreds of orders a day. A rep would copy the customer ID from SalesFlow, paste it into Bill Pro, wait for the account to appear, choose the product bundle, check the tax jurisdiction, copy a service address into Netgate, verify the provisioning flag, paste the confirmation number back into the queue, then mark the ticket complete. If one field had a trailing space, the system would reject it. If a salesperson typed road instead of RD, it would throw an exception. If the billing screen timed out, which it did whenever it felt bored, you started over. The work wasn't hard. That was the insulting part. It was just repetitive, brittle, and easy to mess up at scale. People made mistakes because people are not meant to be clipboard extensions for software that should talk to itself. I started building the automation because I was tired of seeing good employees blamed for bad plumbing. The first version was ugly. It was a Python script running on a spare virtual machine under my desk, because getting a proper server approved at our company required 3 forms, 2 directors, and a blood sacrifice. It read orders from the approved queue, validated the fields, logged into the internal systems using a service account that IT had created, pushed the standard activation steps, and wrote every action to a time-stamped log. It didn't touch custom enterprise orders. It didn't make judgment calls. It handled the boring, standard work that made up about 70% of our volume. I didn't hide it. That's important. I wrote a proposal. I sent it to my manager at the time, Elena, who ran back-office operations before she retired. I included the risks, the controls, the rollback plan, the audit trail, the password rotation process, and a note that the script would stop and escalate any order that didn't match the standard profile. Elena forwarded it to IT security. IT security made me add 2 controls, then approved it. Compliance reviewed the change ticket. Finance reviewed the savings estimate because finance loves nothing more than a spreadsheet where the cells turn green. The first pilot handled 50 accounts. It completed 49 in under 7 minutes total. One order failed because the salesperson had entered the billing address as same as service in a field that expected an actual address. The script rejected it and sent it back for correction. The manual process would have let a tired rep copy the wrong thing and create a billing mess that took 2 weeks to untangle. Elena printed the pilot report and taped it to the whiteboard. "Devin," she said, "this is the first thing in 6 months that made my blood pressure go down." That was the kind of manager Elena was: direct, practical, allergic to drama. If something worked, she wanted it documented, controlled, and scaled. By the end of that year, the automation was handling most standard activations during business hours and a chunk of overnight backlog without anyone babysitting it. We called it Switchboard because every tool needed a name, and mine had the personality of an old telephone operator who never got tired. Switchboard was not glamorous. It did not use AI. It did not have a dashboard with animated charts. It was a tidy little in-house tool that read a queue, performed a checklist, and produced logs so detailed they were almost annoying. Each transaction had a request ID, timestamp, source fields, validation result, system response, activation confirmation, and exception reason if it failed. Every morning I checked the overnight report with my coffee. Most days the report was boring, which is the highest compliment you can give operations software. It saved time immediately. Before Switchboard, we needed 8 to 10 people working activation during peak days. After Switchboard, we could run the same volume with 4, and those 4 spent their time on exceptions and customer-impacting problems instead of copying text between boxes. Turnaround time dropped from hours to minutes for standard accounts. Error rates dropped. Overtime dropped. The sales team stopped sending angry escalation emails at 4:55 p.m. because the queue wasn't sitting at 300 tickets anymore. I kept the approvals because I had been at that company long enough to know how memory worked there. Good results became everyone's idea. Bad results became the fault of whoever touched the keyboard last. So I kept a folder. Not because I expected to need it for revenge. I kept it because documentation is how you stay sane in a place where people say, circle back, instead of, I forgot. The folder had everything. Elena's approval, ET Security's sign-off, compliance notes, the service account ticket, the pilot results, monthly throughput reports. Finance's initial savings model. A later update that showed cost per automated activation had dropped to basically the cost of the server and my maintenance time. I kept the original emails as .eml files, not screenshots. I kept PDFs of the change tickets. I kept exported logs. I kept the boring stuff. That folder sat quietly on a secure internal drive for almost 2 years. Then Elena retired. Her replacement was supposed to be hired internally, but our company had a habit of treating outside candidates like they arrived dipped in gold. After 6 weeks of interviews, leadership announced a new role above the existing department heads, head of compliance and operational controls. The email said the position would harmonize risk ownership across the customer lifecycle. That sentence should have been a warning by itself. His name was Martin Vale. Martin came from a larger telecom company that everyone recognized and no one in operations respected. He had the kind of resume that looked impressive if you didn't ask what any of the bullet points actually meant. Cross-functional governance, control remediation, enterprise risk transformation. I read his LinkedIn profile the day he was announced and got tired halfway through. His first all-hands meeting was in the cafeteria because the big training room was booked for sales kickoff. About 60 of us stood around with paper cups of coffee, while Martin walked in with an assistant from HR and a wireless microphone he did not need. "I'm not here to disrupt for the sake of disruption," he said, which is always what people say right before they disrupt for the sake of disruption. "I'm here to bring adult supervision to processes that have grown organically. Organic is nice in a garden. It is not nice in a regulated environment." A few people laughed politely. I looked over at Samir, the junior developer on my team, and he raised one eyebrow. Samir was 26, sharp, impatient, and convinced every bad manager could be defeated by posting a screenshot in the right Slack channel. I liked him. He reminded me of myself before this place taught me that being right too early just gives people time to bury you. Martin kept going. "My philosophy is simple. If we can't explain it, we can't trust it. If we can't trust it, we can't run it. And if it was approved before my tenure, it will be reviewed during my tenure." That line got my attention. After the meeting, my direct manager, Lorna, pulled me aside near the vending machines. Lorna had inherited Elena's group and did her best, but she was conflict avoidant in the way some people are lactose intolerant. She could survive small amounts of it. Too much made her ill. "He's going to want to look at switchboard," she said. "That's fine," I said. "Everything is documented." She pressed her lips together. "Devin. He's going to want to look at it in his way." I knew what that meant. Martin didn't want to understand the process. He wanted to own it. There is a difference. Understanding requires questions. Ownership, at least for people like Martin, requires a public act of control. His review of Switchboard started the next Monday. He booked a 30-minute meeting and arrived with no technical person from his side, no one from IT security, and no one from compliance who had reviewed the original change. Just him, me, Lorna, Samir, and a woman named Janice from his new controls team, who typed every third sentence into a spreadsheet. I brought a one-page summary, architecture diagram, risk register, process map, approval history, and a sample log. Martin ignored the packet for the first 10 minutes. "So this is the black box," he said. I said, "It's not a black box. The code is in our repository, the logs are exported daily, and every action maps to a documented activation step." "Who wrote it?" I did, with review from IT security and input from 2 activation specialists. Internal code, he said, like he had found mold, maintained by one person. Samir shifted in his chair. I said, "It's maintained by process engineering. Samir and Nia can both run it. The runbook is in Confluence." Martin smiled without opening his mouth. "Can they explain every line?" "They can explain the process controls. If you want a code walkthrough, we can schedule one with IT. "I'm asking you." "Yes," I said. "I can explain every line." He leaned back. "That doesn't comfort me as much as you think it does." There it was. Not a question. Not a concern. A performance. I walked him through the approval trail anyway. I showed him the change ticket from 2 years earlier. I showed him the exception handling. I showed him the audit logs. I showed him the rollback plan. I showed him the finance summary that estimated Switchboard was saving about $98,000 a month in labor avoidance, error correction, credits, and SLA penalty reduction. That number wasn't magic. It came from transaction volume, handle time, loaded labor rate, rework rate, and penalty exposure. Boring math. Real math. Martin looked at the slide and said, "Savings are not controls." "No," I said. "They're outcomes. The controls are on the previous 3 pages." Lorna stared at the table. Janice typed something. Martin tapped the paper with one finger. "I'm going to need a full attestation package." "Sure," I said. "What format?" "I'll let you know." He did not let me know. Instead, for the next 2 weeks, he asked for pieces of information one at a time. Who owned the service account? When was the password last rotated? Which queue permissions did it have? Had legal reviewed automated customer activation language? What was the difference between a standard and non-standard order? Who approved the exception thresholds? Could the tool activate an account without a human viewing it? Could a human override the tool? Could the tool be paused? Could it be restarted? Did it send alerts? Where did alerts go? Who had admin rights? Why did Samir have admin rights if he was junior? Why did Nia have admin rights if she was on loan to the billing integration project? Every question had an answer. Most had already been answered in the documents he had been given. I answered anyway. That was my first mistake, or maybe my first act of self-preservation. In a healthy company, repeated answered questions are a waste of time. In our company, they were an opportunity to create a record. So every time Martin asked something in chat, I answered in chat and linked the documentation. Every time he asked in a hallway, I sent a follow-up email. Per our conversation near the elevator at 2:15 p.m., the switchboard service account is restricted to the activation queue and does not have billing adjustment permissions. Dry, precise. Annoying if you were trying to make the facts slippery. Samir hated it. "He's fishing," he said one afternoon, standing at my desk with a can of cold brew in his hand. "You're giving him a whole aquarium." "I'm giving him rope," I said. "Rope doesn't matter if nobody reads it." "Someone always reads it eventually." He snorted. "That's the most corporate thing you've ever said." He wasn't wrong, but I had learned it the hard way. Years earlier, before Switchboard, a director had blamed my team for a missed activation SLA after sales entered 200 bad orders from a promotion they had launched without telling anyone. I had the email showing we warned them. Nobody cared during the crisis. 6 months later, during budget planning, finance cared very much. The director didn't get fired, but his headcount request died quietly in a spreadsheet. That was when I learned the first rule of corporate justice. It usually arrives late and wearing a blazer. The Friday everything broke started normally. I got in at 7:12 because I liked having the office mostly to myself for the first hour. Our floor had gray carpet, low cubes, and a break room fridge that made a grinding noise every 30 minutes. I made coffee, checked the overnight report, and saw Switchboard had processed 312 standard activations between 6 p.m. and 6 a.m. 3 exceptions, 0 failures, average completion time, 14 seconds. Good boring news. By 9:30, we had a problem somewhere else. Customer experience had loaned 2 of my activation specialists to a billing cleanup project because a tax table import had gone sideways. Network operations had borrowed Naya, one of the 2 people besides me who understood the script deeply, to help map provisioning errors from an outage. Samir was scheduled to spend half his day helping IT test a single sign-on change. That left us thin, but manageable because Switchboard existed. At 11:08, Martin sent a calendar invite for 1 p.m. Subject: Switchboard control disposition. No agenda. I forwarded it to Lorna and asked, "Do you know what this is?" She replied 6 minutes later. "He wants to close review before month end. Just be factual." Just be factual. That was Lorna's version of a prayer. The meeting was in a small room called Pine, which had 6 chairs and a speakerphone from 2009. Martin was already there when I arrived. So was Janice. Lorna came in behind me, holding a notebook against her chest. Martin didn't tell us to sit. He was standing at the end of the table, scrolling on his phone. "I'm issuing a pause directive," he said. I set my laptop bag down slowly. "For Switchboard?" "For the unapproved automation currently performing customer account activations." "It is approved," I said. "The approval packet is in the change record." "Approved by people who no longer own the risk." I looked at Lorna. She looked at Martin. "What triggered the directive?" I asked. "Control uncertainty." "Specific control uncertainty?" He put the phone face down. "Devin, I don't trust black boxes I didn't approve." There it was. The line. Calm, polished, and stupid enough to cost 7 figures. I said, "Switchboard is not a black box, but if you're ordering a shutdown, I need the directive in writing, with scope and rollback authority." He blinked once. He hadn't expected that. People like Martin are used to 2 responses: panic or obedience. A request for documentation interrupts the rhythm. "This meeting is the directive," he said. "I can't shut off a production activation process based on a verbal instruction in a room with no ticket." His smile thinned. "Are you refusing?" "No, I'm asking you to document the instruction so we can execute it correctly." Janice stopped typing. Lorna cleared her throat. "Martin, it might be cleaner to send a written note." "Just for change control." He stared at her long enough that she looked down. Then he picked up his phone. "Fine. You'll have it before close of business? In the meantime, no further enhancements. No changes. No touching the code." "Understood," I said. "And prepare a manual activation plan." That was the first time my stomach actually tightened. "For what volume?" I asked. "All standard activations." If Switchboard is paused, all standard activations go back to the manual queue. Current daily standard volume is between 600 and 900 orders. We do not have staffed capacity for that, especially with 2 specialists loaned out and Naya assigned to network ops. Manual activation at that volume will create a same-day backlog. Within 48 hours, we will miss SLA commitments for business accounts. Within a week, we will need overtime or outside support. He lifted one hand, palm down, like he was calming a dog. "That sounds like a resourcing issue." "It's a throughput issue created by removing the throughput mechanism," Lorna whispered. "Devin." Martin smiled. "That's close to insubordination." I stopped talking. Not because he was right, because the useful part of the meeting was over. He had said the thing. I had warned him. Lorna had heard it. Janice had typed some version of it. The only thing left was to get the email. It arrived at 3:42 p.m. From Martin Vale. To me, Lorna, Janice. Subject: Switchboard immediate control pause. The email said, effective immediately, all automated account activation through Switchboard was to be disabled pending compliance review. Manual activation procedures were to be reinstated. No exceptions. No production use. No code changes. No workaround automations. Existing personnel were expected to maintain business continuity. Any negative customer impact was to be escalated through normal operations channels. It was the kind of email written by a man who thought passive voice was armor. I read it twice. Then I wrote my reply. Martin, acknowledging directive. Before execution, I need to confirm operational impact and scope. Based on current volume, disabling Switchboard will reduce standard activation throughput from approximately 700 to 900 per day to approximately 180 to 240 per day with current staffing. With Naya Patel assigned to Network Ops and Luis Romero and Carla Finch assigned to Billing Cleanup, manual capacity may be lower. Expected impacts include backlog accumulation, missed business activation (SLAs), increased overtime, customer credits, and possible need for outsourced activation support if the pause extends beyond 5 business days. Please confirm that you are directing full production shutdown despite the above impacts, and that no exception is authorized for standard low-risk accounts previously approved for automation. Devon. I showed it to Lorna before sending. She read it and winced. It's a little pointed, she said. It's factual. Can you soften it? Mun. If I soften it, the risk becomes mine. That landed. She handed the laptop back. Send it. I sent it at 3:57. At 4:09, Martin replied. Confirmed. Proceed with shutdown. Compliance does not approve continued use of automation. Manual processing is required until further notice. I remember the exact feeling when that email arrived. Not joy, not anger. It was more like a door closing softly behind me. Whatever happened next, I was not going to save him from it. I shut Switchboard down at 4:17 p.m. I did it cleanly. I stopped the scheduler. I exported the last run logs. I archived the current codebase to the repository with a tag that said pre_pause_approved_state. I updated the runbook status. I sent the required change notification to the operations list. I did not delete anything. I did not sabotage anything. I did not make a dramatic speech. I just turned off the machine that had been quietly holding up a part of the company because the new head of compliance told me to. Then I opened the manual activation queue. There were already 184 tickets waiting. By 5:30, there were 241. By Monday morning, there were 1,126. That weekend was the first warning Martin could still have listened to. Our business sales team worked Saturdays because small companies loved ordering telecom service at the worst possible time. Usually, Switchboard chewed through those orders quietly. That weekend, the queue just sat there unless a human logged in and processed each one by hand. 2 activation reps volunteered for overtime because they were decent people, and because they knew customers would be calling Monday. They got through maybe 80 orders total. Every order had to be checked, copied, pasted, verified, and documented. Every tiny address mismatch slowed them down. Every system timeout stole another minute. I did not jump in and secretly automate anything. I did help manually. That mattered to me. Malicious compliance is only satisfying when you still do your actual job. I processed tickets until my eyes felt gritty. I answered questions. I updated the backlog tracker. I sent status reports at 9 a.m., noon, 3 p.m., and 6 p.m. Each report included the same line: Switchboard remains disabled per compliance directive dated Friday, May 3rd. Martin did not reply to the first 3 reports. At 6:22 p.m. Sunday, he replied to the fourth. Please avoid editorializing in operational updates. I forwarded that to my archive folder too. Monday was bad in the ordinary way. Tuesday was bad in the way that makes people start printing things. By Tuesday at 10 a.m., sales escalation had created a separate spreadsheet to track customers screaming the loudest. Customer care was getting calls from small businesses whose phone numbers hadn't ported, whose fiber installs were complete but unusable, or whose billing accounts existed without activated services. That last one was especially fun because customers could see a bill pending for a service that did not work yet. The business sales director, a man named Calvin, came to our floor at 11:30 and stood next to my cube. "Devin," he said, "why are my activations dying?" I said, "Switchboard was paused Friday by compliance. We're processing manually. Current backlog is 1,489. Unpause it. I don't have authorization." "Whose authorization do you need?" "Martin Vale's." Calvin looked toward the glass offices. "You've got to be kidding me." "I wish I were." He walked away, already dialing his phone. That should have been the second warning Martin listened to. Sales directors are like smoke alarms. Annoying, loud, and usually attached to something real. But Martin didn't unpause the tool. He scheduled a containment meeting instead. The containment meeting had 14 people and 0 containment. Martin opened with, "We are experiencing a temporary normalization period as the organization transitions away from an unvalidated tool." Calvin said, "My team is losing customers." Martin said, "Let's keep this constructive." I sat near the wall again. Lorna sat beside me, looking like she had slept in her cardigan. The customer care manager said, "We need talking points." Someone from provisioning said, "We need clean account IDs. Half these tickets are missing fields." A billing supervisor said, "We need to know whether to start credits now or wait until the customer asks." Then Martin turned to me. "Devin, why wasn't a manual continuity plan maintained?" The room went quiet. It was a clever little move. Not smart, but clever. He wasn't asking why he had killed the automation. He was asking why I had not preserved enough manual capacity to make killing it painless. It was like yanking out a bridge and asking why traffic hadn't learned to swim. I said, "There is a manual procedure. It's documented and currently in use." The capacity gap was identified in my email Friday at 3:57 p.m. Martin's jaw moved once. "I'm asking about planning, not email archaeology." "So am I said. Lorna's shoe bumped mine under the table. A warning. Martin looked around the room. This is exactly why uncontrolled tools create operational complacency. Teams forget how to perform core functions. Samir, who had been pulled into the meeting because he understood the queue logic, muttered, "Or teams stop wasting humans on robot work." Martin heard him. "What was that?" Samir straightened. "I said manual processing is slower by design. That's why the tool exists." "The tool existed," Martin said. Past tense. I saw Samir's face change. He was about to say something that would feel good for 3 seconds and cost him for 3 months. I cut in. "We can increase manual throughput temporarily by bringing back Luis and Carla from billing cleanup, returning Nia from network ops, and authorizing overtime for activation reps. That may raise capacity to around 400 per day. It won't clear the backlog, but it slows growth." Martin nodded as if this had been his point all along. "Good. Do that." Lorna said, "Nia was assigned by network ops leadership. Luis and Carla were loaned through Friday." Martin said, "Then escalate it." He had reassigned the only people who could help maintain or explain the tool, then acted surprised when the people left behind couldn't absorb the manual load. That was his pattern. He made a problem, renamed it, and handed it back. After the meeting, Samir followed me into the stairwell. "Let me leak the email," he said. No. Devin, he just blamed you in front of everyone. He blamed me in front of 14 people who also heard the numbers. That's not enough. It will be. When? After they write you up? After he tells people you built some rogue script? I didn't answer fast enough. He leaned closer. You know that's where this is going. I did know. I just didn't want to say it out loud yet. The rest of that week was a slow-motion car accident with Outlook reminders. Every morning, the backlog was larger. Every afternoon, customer escalations got sharper. Sales started copying vice presidents. Customer care started using phrases like brand damage and avoidable churn. Billing asked whether they should suppress invoices for accounts stuck in pending activation. Legal asked whether any service-level agreements had hard credits attached. The answer was yes. Not every contract had penalties, but enough did. On Thursday, the first SLA penalty notice hit. It was from a regional medical practice group that had ordered new voice service for 3 clinics. Their contract had a service activation window with a credit provision because they were considered priority business customers. The activation was 26 hours late and counting. The penalty wasn't huge by itself, $1,800. But it was the kind of number that wakes up people who ignore process diagrams. I included it in the 3 p.m. status report. At 3:18, Martin replied only to Lorna and me. Devin, status updates should focus on remediation actions, not blame assignment. Please provide a plan to restore acceptable performance under manual controls. I wrote back. Martin, remediation options under current directive are limited to increased manual staffing, overtime, volume reduction, or external processing support. The fastest internal remediation remains restoring switchboard for standard accounts under existing controls, if compliance approves. Please advise whether that option is available for consideration. He replied 5 minutes later. No. Provide manual plan. I added the email to the folder. That night, I got home at 9:40. My apartment was 10 minutes from the office, but I sat in the parking lot for another 8 minutes with the engine off. I remember the dashboard light on my hands. I remember my phone buzzing and not looking at it. My wife, Mara, had left dinner in the microwave with a sticky note on the door that said, "Eat before you start fighting telecom dragons." Mara was a school counselor. She had a gift for hearing the part of a story you were trying to skip. When I finally came in, she watched me take off my shoes and said, "How bad?" "Stupid bad." "Fixable bad or resume bad?" I laughed once. "Depends who reads their email." She sat at the kitchen table while I ate reheated pasta. I told her the short version. New compliance head, killed switchboard, manual backlog, public blame. She listened without interrupting, which is a terrifying skill when your spouse has it. When I finished, she said, "Are you protected?" I have the approvals." That's not what I asked. I looked at her. "Are you protected from being the convenient person?" she said. That was the question I had been avoiding, because the answer was no, not really. Documentation protected the truth. It did not always protect the person holding it. Companies are very good at saying, "This was not your fault," while walking you to the parking lot. "I'm working on it," I said. She nodded. "Then work faster." Friday morning, Martin took the next step. He reassigned Samir. The email came from him at 8:11 a.m. Samir would support a new compliance controls inventory project for the next 30 days. Effective immediately. His current duties were to be redistributed within process engineering. The stated reason was cross-training and knowledge capture. The real reason was obvious. Samir knew too much about switchboard and was too willing to say it out loud. Samir appeared at my desk holding his laptop like he wanted to throw it through a window. "Tell me you can stop this," he said. "I can't. He's benching me from my own work." I know. He wants you alone. I know that too. His eyes were bright, angry in a way that still had hope inside it. Then let me send the documentation to Calvin, to Priya, to the VP, to everyone. No. Why? Because if you scatter it now, he turns it into a leak investigation and makes the story about you. So we just sit here? We let the numbers travel through the channels nobody can call emotional. He stared at me. That means finance. That means finance. I had not talked to Priya yet. Not directly. But I knew she was watching. Priya Mehta was a senior finance analyst assigned to operations planning. She was the person who had reviewed the original switchboard savings model under Elena. She was precise, patient, and quietly lethal with a pivot table. She also had her own history with Martin. 2 weeks after he started, Martin had tried to push a budget line for an outside compliance readiness assessment. The vendor was one he had used at his old company. The line item was vague, expensive, and suspiciously urgent. Priya had asked for scope. Martin had said the scope was executive risk posture. Priya had said that was not a deliverable. He had accused her of slowing down compliance maturity. She had asked him to define maturity in billable units. I wasn't in that meeting. I heard about it from 3 people by lunch. Since then, Martin treated Priya like a clerk who had wandered into a strategy discussion. Priya treated Martin like a math problem with a haircut. I didn't want to drag her into my mess unless there was a legitimate finance reason. By the second Friday, there was. At 10:22 a.m., I sent her a short email. Priya, do you still own the activation cost per transaction model from the switchboard pilot? Current manual processing may require updated variance tracking due to compliance pause. If useful, I can provide daily volume, backlog, manual handle time, overtime estimates, SLA credits, and exception rates. She replied 7 minutes later. Yes, send everything. Include directive and any approvals for pause. Need actuals, not commentary. I smiled for the first time in a week. Actuals, not commentary. That was Priya's love language. I sent her the data. Not gossip. Not accusations. Data. Daily queue volume. Completed activations. Manual handle time samples. Overtime hours. SLA penalty notices. Customer credits requested. Number of borrowed staff unavailable. The original automated throughput. The cost per transaction before and after the shutdown. And, because she asked for approvals, the Friday email where Martin confirmed the full shutdown despite the documented impact. She did not reply that day. She did not need to. The next week, the backlog crossed 3,000. That was when the story changed from Devon's tool got paused to leadership has a visible customer problem. It's amazing how fast executives discover nuance when sales forecasts are attached. Calvin's team was furious because delayed activations meant delayed revenue recognition. Customer care was furious because their reps were getting yelled at for something they couldn't fix. Billing was furious because half-activated accounts created invoice exceptions. Operations was furious because overtime was climbing and morale was tanking. Martin, somehow, was furious at me. He started using phrases like ownership gap and process dependency in meetings. He asked Lorna for a written explanation of why my team had failed to maintain manual readiness. He requested a list of all automations process engineering had built, which was funny because most of them were tiny scripts that renamed files or checked for missing fields. To Martin, every script was a potential ambush. To the rest of us, every script was a bandage over a system leadership had refused to replace. On Wednesday, he held a floor huddle. Not a meeting. A huddle. That was worse because huddles are where managers say things they want witnesses for without putting them in minutes. About 20 of us gathered near the activation team's cubes. Phones rang in the background. Someone's headset kept beeping. The whiteboard behind Martin showed the backlog number in red marker, 3,214. Martin stood with his arms crossed. "I want to be very clear," he said. "We are not in this position because compliance asked for appropriate controls. We are in this position because the organization became dependent on a tool without adequate manual resilience. That dependency was allowed to develop under process engineering." People looked at me. Some looked away quickly. That was worse. He continued, "Going forward, I expect full accountability from the process owner. No excuses about historical decisions. No nostalgia for shortcuts. We need discipline." Shortcut. That word almost got me. I had spent nights building switchboard. I had written documentation nobody wanted to read until they needed a shield. I had sat with activation reps to learn every weird exception. I had built a tool that made customers happier and employees less miserable. And this man, who had not been here a full month, called it a shortcut because he didn't own it. Samir opened his mouth. I shook my head once. He closed it. Martin saw the exchange and smiled. "Devin, anything to add?" It was a trap. If I defended myself, he would call it excuses. If I said nothing, he would treat it as agreement. So I said, "The current backlog is 3,214. With available manual staffing, we are completing about 260 standard activations per day against average incoming volume of 710. Unless volume drops or capacity changes, the backlog will continue to grow by roughly 450 per day." He waited for more. I didn't give him more. Numbers are boring until they are terrifying. That afternoon, Priya appeared at my desk. She didn't schedule a meeting. She just stood there holding her gray notebook. "Walk with me," she said. We walked to the break room on the far side of the floor, the one nobody used because the vending machine only took coins. She leaned against the counter and opened the notebook. "Your manual handle time sample," she said. "Is that measured or estimated?" Measured. 50-ticket sample across 3 reps, average 8 minutes, 40 seconds, median 7 minutes, 10 seconds, long tail on bad address data. Good. Overtime rate? Loaded rate or payroll? Both. I gave her the numbers. She wrote them down. "SLA penalties," she said. "Hard or projected?" "Hard notices are in the folder, projected based on contracts flagged by customer success." "Separate them. Martin will attack projections." "Already did." She looked up, and one corner of her mouth moved, almost a smile. The original switchboard model had annualized savings at $1.05 million, she said. "Your current actuals suggest higher. Because volume is higher now. And because manual failure costs were undercounted. Rework, credits, churn exposure." Finance didn't want to count things they couldn't defend then. "Finance still doesn't," she said, "but now Martin is creating defensible costs in real time." There was a little silence after that. Then she said, "Quarterly business review is in 5 weeks. Operations variance is on the agenda. If I include this, I need the record clean. No leaks, no Slack wars, no dramatic reply all." I thought of Samir. "Understood," I said. "I'm serious, Devin. If this becomes a personality fight, he survives it. If it stays a cost variance with documented decision ownership, he has a problem." "I know." "Good. Then keep your people calm." She closed the notebook and left. That was the moment the plan became real. Not revenge in the movie sense. No secret recordings. No sabotage. No dramatic confrontation in the parking lot. Just an accounting trail. Martin had made a decision. The decision had measurable consequences. The person most qualified to translate consequences into executive language had just decided to pay attention. The hard part was surviving long enough for the numbers to matter. Martin moved faster than I expected. On Monday of the 3rd week, Lorna sent me a meeting invite for 4 p.m. The subject was performance alignment discussion. HR was optional on the invite, which meant HR was not optional in real life. I stared at the subject line for a full minute. Samir came by and saw my face. What? I turned the screen slightly. He read it and said, absolutely not. Apparently yes. Call Priya. No. Devin. Priya can't stop a write-up without making this look coordinated. It is coordinated, he coordinated it. And I need him to keep doing that in writing. Samir looked like he wanted to shake me. You're letting him hurt you for a spreadsheet. That was too close to the truth to answer casually. I'm letting him sign his work, I said. At 3:52, I walked to HR. The HR rooms were on the second floor, down a hallway with framed posters about belonging and accountability. Nothing says accountability like a stock photo of 5 people pointing at a laptop. Lorna was already in the room. So was Martin. So was Tessa from HR, who had kind eyes and the posture of someone trained to survive other people's bad decisions. There was a packet on the table. I sat down. Martin didn't waste time. Devin, this is a formal written warning for insubordination and poor performance. I looked at Lorna. Her eyes were shiny. She hated this. She was still doing it. Tessa slid the packet toward me. The warning said I had resisted compliance direction, failed to maintain adequate manual processing capability, contributed to operational backlog, and displayed a pattern of unconstructive communication. It referenced my editorial status updates and my repeated attempts to relitigate the automation shutdown. It did not include the actual email where Martin confirmed the shutdown after I documented the risk. Funny how that works. Tessa said, "You'll have an opportunity to provide a written response. Signing acknowledges receipt, not agreement." Martin watched me. He wanted anger. He wanted a speech. He wanted the kind of reaction he could fold neatly into the packet and label behavioral. I picked up the pen. "I will sign receipt," I said. "And I will provide a written response with supporting documentation." Martin said, "Keep it concise." I signed. He leaned back. "Devin, I know this is uncomfortable. But part of leadership is understanding that controls are not optional just because a tool is convenient." There it was again. Convenient. Shortcut. Black box. He kept trying to shrink the thing so killing it looked reasonable. I said, "Understood." That was all. After the meeting, I went to the men's room, locked myself in a stall, and sat on the closed toilet lid for about 3 minutes. Not my proudest moment. But sometimes your body reacts after your face does the job. My hands were shaking. My mouth was dry. I remember staring at the little silver screw on the door latch and thinking, absurdly, that someone had painted over it 3 times instead of replacing it. Then I washed my hands, went back upstairs, and wrote my response. It was 9 pages. Concise had left the building. I did not insult Martin. I did not speculate about motive. I attached the approval history, the Friday directive, my impact warning, Martin's confirmation, the daily backlog reports, staffing loan records, manual capacity estimates, and the status updates he had called editorial. I stated that I had complied fully with the shutdown order, maintained manual procedures, supported manual processing, and repeatedly offered the fastest remediation path, restoration under existing controls, which compliance had rejected. At the end, I wrote one sentence I revised 4 times before sending. I respectfully dispute that the resulting operational degradation can be attributed to insubordination or poor performance by the employee who executed the documented compliance directive as ordered. I sent it to HR, Lorna, and Martin. Martin did not reply. Tessa from HR replied the next morning. Received and attached to file. That was all I needed. For a week, it looked like he was going to win anyway. That's the part people skip when they tell revenge stories. They jump from "I had the evidence" to "then everyone clapped." Real life has a swamp in the middle. Evidence doesn't make your calendar easier. Documentation doesn't stop people from whispering. Being right doesn't make your mortgage payment. I updated my resume that weekend. Mara found me at the dining table Sunday morning with my laptop open and a half-finished LinkedIn profile rewrite on the screen. "Resume bad?" she asked. "Maybe." She put coffee next to me. "Do you want me to read it?" "No, it's depressing." "Then definitely." She read it anyway because she had married me and therefore had certain legal rights to annoy me. When she got to the bullet about switchboard, she said, "This sounds like you assisted with something. You built the thing. Say that." "I don't want to sound like I'm overselling it." "Devin, the man trying to fire you is underselling it for you. Don't help him." That stuck with me. Monday, the backlog passed 5,000. Customer experience created a war room. Sales started offering credits before customers asked. Billing had to build a suppression list for pending accounts, so invoices didn't go out before activation. The manual team was exhausted. People who had been proud of their work were now measuring the day by how far behind they still were when they logged off. One activation specialist, Carla, cried in the supply room after a salesperson yelled at her over a delayed medical office account. Carla was one of the best we had. She could spot a bad order from 3 fields away, but no human can outwork a broken system forever. I found her because I went looking for printer paper and heard someone trying not to cry. "Hey," I said softly. "You okay?" She wiped her face with the heel of her hand. "I'm fine." Nobody who says that in a supply room is fine. I stood in the doorway so she didn't feel trapped. "Sales is acting like we're doing this on purpose," she said. "I know. They. We had a tool that worked." "I know." "Then why are we doing this?" That question had a simple answer and no useful answer. "Because the person with authority made the call," I said, "and now the record has to show what the call costs." She looked at me. "That doesn't help me today." "No," I said, "it doesn't. I'm sorry." That was the lowest part for me, more than the write-up. I could take Martin aiming at me. I had chosen to hold the line. Carla hadn't. Luis hadn't. The customer care reps hadn't. The small businesses waiting for service hadn't. Martin's ego was using everyone as padding. That afternoon, I almost broke. I opened the switchboard repository and stared at the pre_pause tag. It would have taken me maybe 12 minutes to restart it. Less if I skipped the paperwork. The server was still there. The service account still existed. The runbook was current. The queue was begging for it. My cursor hovered over the command line. Then Samir appeared behind me. "Don't," he said. I turned. "How did you know?" "Because I would." He pulled a chair over and sat beside me. For a minute, neither of us said anything. Then he said, "I hate this." "Me too." "I hate that being careful looks like losing." I closed the terminal. "It only looks like losing because he can still pretend the bill isn't real." Samir rubbed his eyes. "Priya better be good." "She is." "She better be terrifying." "Also yes." He laughed, but there wasn't much humor in it. Priya was doing more than I knew. I found out later that she had built 3 models. The first was the cleanest and most conservative: direct labor cost, overtime, hard SLA penalties, confirmed customer credits, and manual rework. That one already looked bad. The second added delayed revenue recognition and projected penalties based on current backlog age. That one looked worse. The third added churn risk and vendor outsourcing estimates. That one looked like a crime scene, financially speaking. She didn't use the third model first. That was smart. If you lead with the biggest scary number, People argue about assumptions. If you lead with the smallest number and it's still ugly, people go quiet. She also requested vendor quotes. Not because she wanted outsourcing, because Martin did. When manual processing didn't recover, Martin proposed bringing in an outsourcing vendor to handle overflow activation work. He framed it as temporary managed service support. He refused to consider restoring switchboard. The tool, in his words, remained non-compliant pending full validation. But paying an outside vendor to rebuild and run the same process somehow became responsible governance. The vendor was called North Star Process Solutions. Of course it was. Vendors are legally required to sound like either a mountain retreat or a satellite. Martin had used them before. That came out later too. Not in a scandalous kickback way, at least not that anyone proved. More in the ordinary corporate way where managers trust vendors who make them feel important. North Star sent glossy decks. They used phrases like intelligent workflow orchestration and compliance-forward service delivery. Their sales director called Martin Marty in meetings, which told me everything I needed to know. The first vendor scoping call included me because I was still the process owner, whether Martin liked it or not. It was on Teams at 2 p.m. on a Thursday. Martin, Janice, Lorna, someone from procurement, 2 North Star reps, and me. North Star's technical lead asked, "Can you walk us through the standard activation decision tree?" I said, "Yes. There are 14 required fields, 3 validation checks, 2 external system confirmations, and exception routing based on mismatch type. I can send the runbook." Martin said, "Send process documentation only, no code." The North Star sales director smiled. "Of course, we don't need code. We'll design a compliant solution from the ground up." From the ground up? I muted myself. The technical lead asked how many standard activations we processed monthly. I gave the number. He asked average handle time. I gave the measured sample. He asked target SLA. I gave that. He asked exception percentage. I gave that. He asked whether we had historical transaction logs to train their workflow model. Martin said, "We will provide appropriate data extracts after legal review." I said nothing. The call lasted 45 minutes. By the end, North Star had enough to price the problem, but not enough to solve it cheaply. Their quote arrived the following Tuesday. I wasn't copied at first. Priya was, because finance had to review any new spend. She forwarded me one line only, no attachment. Annual run rate appears to be approximately $1.2 million before implementation overages. Please preserve all current actuals. I stared at the email. $1.2 million a year. To rebuild what we already had. For free. Not free in the childish sense. My salary wasn't free. The server wasn't free. Maintenance wasn't free. But the incremental cost was tiny compared with a 7-figure managed service contract. Switchboard existed. It had approvals. It had logs. It had 2 years of production history. Martin had killed it because it did not make him feel in control, and now a vendor was offering to sell control back to us by the month. That was the number the story needed. Not because the earlier costs didn't matter. They did. The overtime mattered. The credits mattered. Carla crying in the supply room mattered. But executives are people, and people understand pain best when it arrives with commas. Priya built the slide around that number. She didn't show me the full deck until the day before the quarterly business review. We met in a small focus room near finance, just big enough for 2 chairs and a screen. The room had no windows and smelled faintly like dry erase markers. She opened the deck and clicked to slide 16. The title was Automation Pause Cost Bridge. It had a waterfall chart. On the left, baseline activation cost, then bars for overtime, backlog labor, SLA credits, delayed revenue, rework, and vendor run rate. On the right, projected annualized avoidable cost. The final number was $1.18 million to $1.34 million, depending on whether the vendor ramp went cleanly. Under the chart was a footnote. Compliance-directed pause confirmed 5/3. Automation restoration option rejected 5/9, 5/13, 5/17. I leaned back. That's direct, I said. It's sourced, Priya said. She clicked to the next slide. This one had 2 columns. On the left, existing switchboard controls. On the right, proposed vendor controls, audit logs, service account restrictions, exception routing, runbook, approval trail, daily reconciliation, rollback procedure. The 2 columns were almost identical, except the vendor column had 6-month implementation timeline and annual fee. I said, "He's going to say the vendor is independent." Next slide. She clicked. Independent validation option. Internal audit review of existing switchboard. Estimated duration, 4 weeks. Estimated cost. Internal hours plus limited consultant review, $28,000 to $45,000 if external code assessment required. I looked at her. She said, "I asked internal audit what they would need." "When?" "2 weeks ago." "Priya, what? That's beautiful." She gave me a look. "Don't make it weird." There were more slides. Staffing impact, customer impact, backlog aging, quote summary, decision timeline. The timeline was the part that made my throat tighten. May 3rd, compliance pause directive issued. May 3rd, process engineering warned of throughput collapse. May 3rd, compliance confirmed full shutdown. May 6th, backlog exceeded 1,100. May 9th, SLA penalties began. May 10th, compliance rejected restoration option. May 13th, manual backlog exceeded 3,000. May 15th, process owner received performance warning. May 17th, compliance rejected restoration option again. May 23rd, outsourcing quote received. Annual run rate approximately $1.2 million. It was all there. Clean, boring, devastating. "Will they let you present it?" I asked. Priya closed the laptop halfway. The CFO asked for operations variance detail. This is operations variance detail. Martin will try to move it to a separate review. He can try. There was a pause. Then she said, "Devin, I need you to understand something. Tomorrow is not a trial. Nobody is going to bang a gavel and declare you innocent. They'll ask questions. Martin will deflect. Lorna may fold. The VP may want to follow up. Corporate consequences move slowly." I know. Do you? I thought about the write-up in my HR file. I thought about my resume on the dining table. I thought about Carla. I thought about Samir watching me almost restart the tool. "I know enough," I said. She nodded. "Bring your source folder," she said. "Don't open it unless asked." The week between the quote and the business review was when Martin got careless. Pressure does that to people. When everything is still theoretical, they can sound calm. When the numbers start walking around with names attached, they start reaching for whatever lever is closest. Martin's closest lever was always authority. On Monday morning, he sent a new directive to Lorna, me, and the activation supervisors. Manual activations would now be prioritized by revenue tier, not queue age. Enterprise-adjacent accounts first, then medical and public sector, then everyone else. On paper, that sounded rational. In practice, it meant small businesses that had already been waiting 7 or 8 days got pushed behind newer orders with bigger monthly recurring revenue. Carla read the email and came to my desk with her jaw tight. "So now we get to tell the bakery they don't matter because the law firm pays more," she said. "Don't phrase it that way on a call." "I'm not joking." "I know." She put the printed email on my desk. She had highlighted one line. Compliance expects operations to exercise mature prioritization during constrained processing windows. What does mature mean? She asked. It means he wants the outcome without the ownership. She stared at the page. Can he do that? He can ask. We can document the impact. I hated how often that was my answer. Document the impact. It sounded passive. It sounded like watching a sink overflow while writing down the water level. But in a company like ours, the person who grabbed a mop without authorization could end up blamed for the flood. So I wrote another response. I confirmed the directive. I noted the expected customer impact. I asked whether customer experience and sales had approved revenue tier prioritization over queue age prioritization. I copied Lorna. Martin replied 12 minutes later. Do not overcomplicate. Execute prioritization. I saved it. Then I walked to Calvin's office. Calvin was on the phone, pacing behind his desk. His office had a whiteboard covered in sales regions and angry red circles. When he saw me, he held up one finger, ended the call, and said, "Please tell me you have good news." I have news. That's not the same thing. I showed him the prioritization directive. He read it, then read it again. Did customer experience agree to this? Not that I know of. Did sales? That's why I'm here. He swore under his breath. This is going to light up my regional managers. We promised first-in processing to half these small business accounts after last week's delay. Then you may want to respond in writing. He looked at me over the paper. You're really committed to that, aren't you? It's my only hobby now. That got half a laugh out of him, but he did send the response. He wrote that sales did not support reprioritizing older customer commitments without executive approval and requested that any customer-facing impact be attributed to the compliance-directed manual processing constraint. He copied Renee. Martin did not answer Calvin. He called Lorna. I know because Lorna came out of her office 15 minutes later looking pale and asked me to join a quick call. Quick call is another corporate phrase that means someone wants no record. I brought my notebook anyway. Martin was already talking when I sat down. This is becoming unnecessarily political, he said through the speaker. I need your team aligned, Lorna. Devin is encouraging stakeholders to challenge compliance direction. I wrote that sentence down with the time. Lorna said, Devin brought a customer prioritization change to sales because it affects customer commitments. It affects processing order. That is operational execution. It's also customer-facing. There was a pause. I looked at Lorna. That was the hardest I had heard her push him. Martin said, I am not interested in debate. I need confirmation that process engineering will follow instructions. Lorna looked at me. I nodded once. She said, we will follow documented instructions and document impacts. Martin hung up 2 seconds later. Lorna stared at the speakerphone. That went well, I said. She gave me a tired look. Don't. But something had shifted. Not enough to fix the mess. Enough that she was no longer pretending neutrality was protection. On Tuesday, Martin tried a different angle. He asked IT to disable the switchboard repository access for everyone except compliance review staff. Ben from IT security forwarded the request to me with one sentence. Please confirm operational need before I respond. I walked to Ben's office instead of replying. Ben was one of those security people who never raised his voice because he didn't need to. His office had 3 monitors, no decorations, and a mug that said, Trust but verify. He wants repo access restricted, I said. Ben nodded. I saw. If he removes process engineering access, we can't support validation, restart, or even answer code questions accurately. That's what I thought. Also, the repository is read accessible to IT security already. Nothing is hidden. That's also what I thought. I waited. Ben leaned back. Devin, I'm not asking because I don't know. I'm asking because I want your answer in the ticket. That was the first time I realized other people had started building the record too. I wrote the response in the ticket. Restricting repository access away from process engineering would impair support and validation. Current permissions already included IT security read access. Any access change should be tied to a specific risk finding. Ben added his own note underneath. Security does not recommend removing operational owner access absent evidence of misuse. Martin withdrew the request an hour later. On Wednesday, Janice came to my desk. That surprised me. Janice had been Martin's shadow since he arrived. She wasn't unkind, exactly. She was careful. Careful in the way people get when their boss likes loyalty tests. She stood near the edge of my cube and said quietly, "Do you have the exception report format from before the pause?" "Yes." "Can you send it to me?" "For what purpose?" She swallowed. Martin asked me to compare it with the vendor's proposed daily control report. I opened the folder and attached a sample report from the month before the shutdown. It showed every exception category, count, ticket ID, assigned owner, and resolution age. I also attached the documentation explaining how the report was generated. Janice looked at the file names on my screen. "You really have everything," she said. "I try." Her voice dropped. "He told us the logs were incomplete." I turned to look at her. She immediately looked down the aisle like she had said too much. I said, "The daily reports are complete for standard activations. Raw logs are retained separately. If you need them for a control comparison, submit a request and I'll provide them." She nodded. "Thanks." Then she left. I didn't tell Samir about that conversation until later. He would have wanted to adopt Janice as a witness and build a conspiracy board. I didn't need a conspiracy board. I needed Janice to know, in her own time, that Martin had been lying to his own staff about the evidence. Thursday brought the strangest meeting of the entire mess. Northstar asked for a follow-up technical session. Martin scheduled it for 1 hour and labeled it Vendor Discovery. Priya accepted the invite, so did procurement, so did Ben from IT security. Martin probably expected a normal scoping call. What he got was a preview of the business review, only smaller and more uncomfortable. The Northstar sales director opened with a cheerful recap. They could provide a managed team, workflow tooling, quality review, compliance reporting, and transition support. The implementation fee would be separate from the annual run rate. They would need process documentation, historical transaction samples, exception categories, and access to subject matter experts. Priya asked, "How many subject matter expert hours are assumed in the quote?" The sales director hesitated. "We'd refine that during implementation." "So not included." "Not specifically." She wrote something down. Ben asked, "Would your team use our service accounts or your own?" The technical lead said, "Typically we use client-provisioned accounts with role-based restrictions." Ben said, "So the same account control problem exists, only with vendor users." The technical lead looked at Martin. Martin looked annoyed. Procurement asked, "Is the $1.2 million quote fixed price?" "It's an estimated annual run rate based on provided volume," the sales director said. "So not fixed." "Subject to final scope," Priya wrote again. Then the technical lead asked me, "How long did the internal workflow take to build originally?" Martin cut in, "We're not here to discuss legacy development." I said, "The first pilot took 6 weeks around other work. Production hardening took another 8. It has been operating for 2 years." The technical lead blinked. 2 years? "Yes." "With transaction logs?" "Daily." "Exception reports?" "Daily." "Rollback procedure?" "Documented and tested." He looked down at his notes. To his credit, He seemed less like a salesman in that moment and more like an engineer who had just realized he was being asked to rebuild a chair while standing in a furnished room. Martin said, "Again, the issue is compliance confidence." Priya looked up. Then the comparison should include the cost of validating the existing workflow, not only replacing it. No one argued, not even Northstar. Vendors know when a room has shifted from buying to documenting. After the call, Priya sent a meeting note with 3 bullets. Vendor quote, excludes internal SME hours. Vendor controls do not eliminate service account risk. Existing automation validation remains a lower-cost remediation option. She copied the CFO's chief of staff. I read that line 3 times. The CFO's chief of staff was not the CFO, but in practical terms, it meant the CFO's office was now watching. Martin had wanted executive attention. He had it. That Friday, 1 week before the review, I found a printed copy of my write-up on the shared printer. Not the whole packet. Just the first page. My name, the words insubordination and poor performance, and the HR header. Someone had printed it and forgotten it, or someone had printed it to make sure I found it. I never learned which. It sat in the output tray on top of a stack of call center schedules. For a few seconds, I just looked at it. Then I picked it up, walked to HR, and handed it to Tessa. "This was on the shared printer," I said. Her face changed fast. "Where?" "4th floor east printer." "Did anyone else see it?" "Probably." She closed her office door. "I'm sorry," she said. "That should not have happened." "No, it shouldn't." She took the page like it was contaminated. "I'll investigate the print logs." I believed her. I also knew that even if she found the person, the damage had already done what it was meant to do. By lunch, 2 people were too friendly to me and 1 person stopped talking when I entered the break room. That is how offices tell you a private document has become weather. I went back to my desk and sat there for a minute. Samir rolled his chair over. "I heard," he said. "Of course you did. Do you want me to find out who printed it?" "No. I can." That's why the answer is no. He looked at me, frustrated but quieter than before. "How are you this calm?" "I'm not." "You look calm." "That's because I have a mortgage." He didn't laugh. I opened the source folder and added a new subfolder called HR Incident. I saved my email to Tessa. I saved her acknowledgement. I saved a note with the time I found the page. Then I closed the folder and processed manual activations for 2 hours because the queue still existed and customers still didn't care about our internal drama. That night, Mara and I went for a walk around our neighborhood. We didn't talk about Martin for the first 10 minutes. We talked about a house 3 blocks over that had painted its front door bright yellow. We talked about whether our dishwasher was dying or just being dramatic. Then she said, "You don't have to be noble about this." I knew what she meant. "I'm not being noble." "You kind of are. It's annoying." "I'm being strategic." Strategic people can still admit they're hurt. We walked past a streetlight that flickered whenever the wind hit it. I said, "I'm angry that he made everyone else pay for his pride. I'm angry that he made me look like the problem. I'm angry that doing the correct thing still feels like standing still while someone throws things at you." Mara took my hand. "Good," she said. "Keep that. Just don't let it drive." That was the best advice anyone gave me through the whole thing. The weekend before the review, I rebuilt my folder index. Not the evidence itself. That was already there. I built a map. If someone asked about approval, I had the path. If someone asked about controls, I had the path. If someone asked about manual capacity, I had the path. If someone asked about Martin's confirmation, restoration refusals, staffing reassignments, SLA penalties, vendor quote, or the write-up, I had the path. I named files like a person who expected hostile questions. Dates first. Source, second. Topic, third. Samir called me Saturday afternoon. Are you working? No. You're lying. A little. Need help? I almost said no. Then I remembered that keeping people calm did not mean keeping them useless. Yes, I said. I need you to review the technical timeline. Don't editorialize, just tell me if any sequence is wrong. He came over with Thai food and his laptop. Mara made him take his shoes off because our house had standards. We sat at the dining table for 3 hours walking through every technical step from the first pilot to the shutdown. He caught 2 small things. One password rotation date was off by a week. One exception report change had been approved by Nia, not him. Tiny details. But tiny details are where people like Martin look for cracks. At the end, Samir sat back and said, "It's clean." Good. No, I mean it. He can't say this was some cowboy script. There were more controls on this than on half the tools he brought with him. Don't say cowboy in the review. I wasn't invited. Still, I can hear you thinking it. He grinned for the first time in days. On Sunday night, Priya sent me one final email. Subject, QBR source package. It had no greeting. Attached is the source index for activation variant slides. Please review for factual accuracy only. Do not suggest wording unless a statement is inaccurate. That was Priya in one paragraph. Helpful, sharp, and allergic to unnecessary adjectives. I reviewed it. Everything was accurate. The wording was colder than I would have written and better because of it. No villain language, no ego, no dramatic verbs. Compliance-directed pause, manual capacity variance, restoration option rejected, vendor replacement quote, avoidable annualized run rate, decision ownership, decision ownership. I stared at that phrase for a while. That was what Martin had tried to avoid from the beginning. He wanted authority without ownership. Priya had found a way to put the ownership back on the same line as the decision. I replied with 2 words. Looks accurate. Then I closed my laptop and slept badly. The quarterly business review started at 9 a.m. Those meetings were usually dull in a comforting way. Slides about call volume, slides about churn, slides about install intervals. Someone would ask why a metric was red. Someone else would say seasonality, and everyone would move on. This one felt different before it started. Too many people came in with paper copies. Legal was there, internal audit was there, procurement was there. Martin arrived with Janice and the North Star deck printed in color. I noticed that immediately. He expected to pitch outsourcing. He did not expect outsourcing to be the evidence. The first hour passed normally. Sales pipeline, customer care hold times, billing exceptions. Then the VP of operations, a woman named Renee, looked at Priya. Let's go to activation variants. Priya stood. She did not look nervous. Priya never looked nervous. She looked like she had reconciled a bank statement and found God hiding in cell F42. Activation operations moved materially off baseline following the May 3rd control pause, she said. I'm going to walk through volume, cost, customer impact, and remediation options. Martin shifted in his chair. The first slides were harmless. Volume trend, backlog trend, manual capacity. He could survive those. He nodded along, even made a little note when Priya said manual capacity was constrained. I could almost hear him preparing the sentence. Resource issue, legacy dependency, manual readiness. Then she clicked to the cost bridge. The room changed. You could feel it. People don't gasp in corporate meetings. They go still. The little side movements stop. Pens stop tapping. Someone who was checking email puts the phone face down. Renee leaned forward. Walk me through the $1.2 million, she said. Priya did. She started with confirmed costs, not projections. Over time, hard SLA penalties, credits already issued, temporary staffing requests, then delayed revenue, then rework, then the vendor quote. She was careful with every phrase. Annualized run rate. Avoidable under restoration scenario. Excludes potential churn. Excludes reputational impact. Excludes implementation overages. The CFO, who had been quiet all morning, said, "Who requested the vendor quote?" Martin sat up. Compliance requested an option to stabilize operations under controlled conditions. Priya clicked once. The next slide showed the source and timing of the quote. North Star Process Solutions, requested by compliance. Scope, standard activation processing replacement. Estimated annual run rate, $1.2 million. Implementation, 12 to 16 weeks. Exclusions, custom orders, legacy account cleanup, data remediation. The CFO said, "Replacement for what?" There it was. Priya didn't answer immediately. She clicked to the two-column controls slide. "Replacement for the existing switchboard automation," she said. Functionally, the vendor scope replicates the standard activation workflow previously handled internally. The control sets are similar. The primary differences are cost, implementation duration, and ownership. Martin said, "That's an oversimplification." Priya turned slightly. "Which part?" He opened his mouth, then closed it. Because the slide was specific. Audit logs, exception routing, service account restrictions, daily reconciliation, runbook, approval trail. If he attacked one, he had to explain why the vendor version was acceptable and the internal version was not. He chose a different path. "The internal tool lacked current compliance approval," he said. "My directive was based on control uncertainty." Renee looked at me for the first time. "Devon, was the tool approved?" I opened my laptop. Slowly. Not theatrical. Just enough. "Yes," I said. "I have the original approval packet, IT security sign-off, compliance review notes, change ticket, rollback plan, and 2 years of production logs. It was approved under the prior control owner." Martin's position is that the approval did not carry forward to his ownership. Martin said, "That's not an accurate characterization." Priya clicked again. The timeline appeared. May 3rd. My warning. His confirmation. May 10th. Restoration rejected. May 13th. Backlog over 3,000. May 15th. Performance warning. May 23rd. Vendor quote. Under May 3rd, in smaller text, was the sentence from his email. Confirmed. Proceed with shutdown. Compliance does not approve continued use of automation. Manual processing is required until further notice. The room read it. Nobody spoke for a few seconds. Martin reached for his water bottle. His fingers hit the side instead of the cap, and the bottle made a dull clink against the table. It was tiny. Probably nobody else noticed. I did. The CFO said, "Was the throughput impact known before shutdown?" Priya clicked. My 357 email appeared. Not the whole thing. Just the relevant excerpt. Disabling switchboard will reduce standard activation throughput from approximately 700 to 900 per day to approximately 180 to 240 per day with current staffing. Expected impacts include backlog accumulation, missed business activation SLAs, increased overtime, customer credits, and possible need for outsourced activation support if the pause extends beyond 5 business days. Below it, Martin's reply. Confirmed. Proceed with shutdown. That was the moment. Not the firing, not the later announcement. That silence right there was the payoff beginning to land. Martin stared at the screen. For the first time since I'd met him, he had no sentence ready. His whole style depended on controlling the frame before facts could harden. But the facts had hardened. They were on the wall, in his own words, with finance numbers attached. Renee said, "Martin, did you review the throughput warning before confirming the shutdown?" He cleared his throat. "I receive a high volume of operational correspondence. The compliance concern was significant enough that we had to act." The CFO said, "That's not an answer." A small thing happened then. Janice stopped typing. She had been typing through every meeting for weeks, turning Martin's phrases into action items and control notes. But when the CFO said that, her hands lifted off the keyboard and stayed there. Martin said, "Yes, I reviewed the concern, but it was one input." "What were the other inputs?" Renee asked. "Control uncertainty," as I said. "Specific control uncertainty." He glanced at me. I saw him make the calculation. If he said the logs were inadequate, I could show them. If he said the service account was uncontrolled, IT security could answer. If he said no rollback existed, the packet had it. If he said the code was unreviewed, he would have to explain why he never scheduled the code review I offered. So he went back to the line that had started it all. "I don't trust black boxes I didn't approve," he said. The second the words left his mouth, he knew. It was like watching someone step onto a stair that wasn't there, because that line sounded fine in a small conference room when he had power, and I was the only person pushing back. It sounded decisive, executive, tough on risk. In Blue Ridge with finance, legal, audit, operations, procurement, customer care, and the CFO watching a $1.2 million slide, it sounded like what it was. Ego, wearing a controls badge. Priya didn't smile. She just clicked. The next slide was titled Existing Transparency Controls. Code Repository Access. Available to IT Security and Process Engineering. Daily Transaction Logs. Retained for 2 years. Exception Reports. Emailed daily to Operations. Change Approvals. Documented. Rollback. Documented and tested. Internal Audit Validation Option. Available, 4-week estimate. Black box was not on the slide. It didn't need to be. Renee looked at Martin. "This doesn't read as a black box," she said. Martin's face changed in stages. First annoyance, then calculation, then something smaller, almost private, when he understood that the phrase he had used to dominate a Friday meeting had become the phrase that trapped him. His eyes moved from the slide to me, then to Priya, then back to the email excerpt above the cost bridge. He knew then. He knew it wasn't just that the tool worked. It was that every off-ramp had been put in writing. The approval packet, the warning, the confirmation, the restoration offers, the internal audit option, the vendor quote. He had not been ambushed by hidden information. He had walked past sign after sign because the signs were held by people he thought he could overrule. The CFO asked, "What would it take to restore switchboard under temporary controls while validation runs?" Everyone looked at me again. I had prepared for that question. I still felt my pulse in my neck. "Technically, less than an hour," I said. "From a control standpoint, I would recommend written temporary authorization, IT security confirmation of service account status, daily reconciliation to finance and operations, exception report review by compliance, and internal audit scheduling of validation review. We can limit scope to standard low-risk activations exactly as before. No custom orders, no billing adjustments, no exceptions processed automatically." The head of internal audit, a quiet man named Howard, said, "That is reasonable as an interim control set." Martin said, "I object to restoring an unvalidated process under pressure." Renee said, "Noted." That one word landed hard. Noted is what leaders say when they want the minutes to show they heard you and ignored you. The CFO turned to procurement. "Do not proceed with North Star pending further review." Then to Renee. Work with IT, audit, and Devon on temporary restoration by end of day if feasible. Then to HR. I want a review of any performance actions connected to this incident. Martin looked down. For a second, I almost felt sorry for him. Not because he didn't deserve the consequences. He did. But because understanding looks humiliating from the inside. He had built a whole first-month identity around being the adult in the room, and now the room had discovered he was the person who pulled a load-bearing beam because he didn't like who installed it. He didn't look at me again for the rest of the meeting. The meeting didn't end with yelling. Those meetings never do. It ended with action items, owners, due dates, and the kind of polite voices people use when the decision has already been made above someone's head. But the damage to Martin was visible immediately. After the review, Renee asked me, Lorna, IT security, and Howard from internal audit to stay back. Martin was not asked to stay. That was the first consequence. He gathered his papers slowly. The North Star deck, the color one he'd brought to pitch, slid halfway out of its folder. He pushed it back in with 2 fingers. Janice left behind him, still carrying her laptop open, but not typing. When the door closed, Renee exhaled. Devon, she said, can switchboard be restored today? Yes. Do it by the book. I don't care if the book is longer than the Bible. I want the controls explicit. Understood. Howard said, send me the approval packet and logs. I'll assign an auditor Monday. The IT security manager, Ben, said, service account is still active but locked from the pause. I can have it re-enabled with a temporary control flag once the ticket is approved. Lorna finally spoke. Her voice was quiet. I'll authorize the operations change. Renee looked at her. Not unkindly, but directly. You will also document staffing impact and why the prior warnings did not change the decision path. Lorna nodded. I did not look at her. I knew she felt bad. I also knew her feeling bad had not protected me when it mattered. Both things can be true. We restored switchboard at 4:46 p.m. Not fully, not recklessly. We restored it under a temporary authorization with more oversight than some banking systems. IT re-enabled the service account. I verified the code hash against the pre_pause tag. Ben watched. Howard watched over Teams for the first run. Lorna approved the change ticket. Priya was copied on the reconciliation report. Compliance was copied too, but Martin did not respond. The first activation took 16 seconds. It was a standard small business fiber account for a dental office outside Dayton. Clean address. Clean billing profile. No exceptions. Switchboard validated it, pushed it, logged it, and returned the confirmation number like it had simply been waiting for everyone to stop being dramatic. Samir stood behind me with his arms crossed. Do another, he said. I did. 14 seconds. Carla, who had been processing manually 2 rows over, looked at the screen and whispered, Oh, thank God. By 6 p.m., Switchboard had processed 311 standard activations, exceptions routed correctly, no failures. The backlog was still ugly, but for the first time in weeks, it was shrinking instead of growing. I sent the status report at 6:12. Switchboard restored under temporary controls per operations, IT security, and internal audit authorization. Standard activation backlog reduced from 5,842 to 5,531 during initial run window. Exception rate within historical range. Daily reconciliation attached. I wanted to add something petty. I didn't. Growth is disappointing sometimes. At 6:29, Priya replied all. Received. Finance will update variance forecast. That was her version of confetti. The next few weeks were strange. Martin still had his title, technically, but his authority leaked out of the room. People stopped routing questions through him unless they had to. Renee assigned the switchboard validation review to internal audit and IT security. not compliance. Procurement froze the North Star quote. HR scheduled follow-up conversations about my write-up. Lorna apologized to me in a private meeting, which I accepted because I needed to keep working with her, but I did not pretend it fixed everything. I should have pushed harder, she said. Yes, I said. She looked down. I let the silence sit for a second. Not to punish her, to make sure the truth didn't get softened into mutual regret. Then I said, I need the performance warning removed. Not amended. Removed. I'm working with HR. Good. I also need Samir returned to process engineering. That's already approved. And Carla's team needs relief, not a thank you email. She nodded. Overtime recovery days. Temporary support. Renee approved it. That mattered more to me than the apology. Samir came back the next Monday with a compliance controls inventory mug on his desk. Someone from Martin's team had given it to him as part of the project. He put pens in it and wrote evidence on a sticky note underneath. Subtle, I said. I'm growing, he said. He had grown, actually. We both had. He had learned that leaking early can ruin a clean case. I had learned that patience can start to look like permission if you don't protect the people around you while you wait. Internal audit finished the validation in 4 weeks. Their report found 3 medium-risk issues and no high-risk issues. The medium risks were boring and fixable. Service account review frequency needed to be quarterly instead of semi-annual. Code review evidence needed a more formal sign-off, and exception threshold changes needed a second approver. We fixed all 3 within 10 business days. Howard's final memo said Switchboard could continue operating under enhanced controls. I printed that memo and did not tape it to a whiteboard because I am an adult. I did save it in the folder. The performance warning was removed from my file. HR did it quietly. No ceremony. Tessa sent me an email with one sentence. The May 15th written warning has been rescinded and removed from your employee record. I read it twice, then forwarded it to my personal archive, because trust is nice. And PDFs are better. Martin's exit was slower. People always want the villain dragged out by security. That rarely happens unless money is missing, or someone says something legally exciting. Martin was removed the corporate way. First, his direct reports started reporting to Renee, temporarily. Then, his approval authority over operational tools was suspended pending governance redesign. Then he was assigned to a special project reviewing policy taxonomy, which is where careers go to develop a cough. Then, about 3 months after the quarterly review, an email went out. Martin Vale will be leaving the organization to pursue other opportunities. We thank him for his contributions. No one knew what the contributions were. His last day, I saw him in the parking garage. It was a Thursday morning. I was coming in late because I had worked a maintenance window the night before. He was loading 2 boxes into the back of a silver SUV. Not dramatic boxes. Office boxes. One had a framed certificate sticking out of it. The North Star color deck was probably long shredded by then, but I liked imagining it in there. He saw me. For a second, we just stood there between concrete pillars while a car alarm chirped somewhere below us. I didn't say anything. He did. You got what you wanted, he said. It was such a perfect Martin sentence. Even at the end, he needed to make his consequences somebody else's appetite. I said, I wanted you to read the warning before you confirm the shutdown. He looked away. That was the last time I saw him. A month later, Renee created a small automation governance group and asked me to lead the platform side. Not because I was a hero, because the company had finally learned that small internal tools can become critical infrastructure, and pretending otherwise doesn't make them safer. My new job was to make sure Switchboard and tools like it had proper ownership, reviews, controls, documentation, and succession plans, so no one person, including me, could become the excuse for shutting them down. That part mattered. Because Martin had been wrong about Switchboard, but he had not been wrong that dependency needs governance. He was wrong in the way petty tyrants are often wrong. They find a real concept, strip out the humility, and use the shell as a weapon. A tool that saves a company $1 million deserves controls. It also deserves leaders who can tell the difference between risk management and ego management. Switchboard kept running. 6 months after the shutdown, it had a proper server, a backup owner, a formal code review schedule, quarterly access recertification, and a dashboard that Samir built mostly because he wanted the graph to show uptime in green. Carla's team stopped doing standard activations manually except for training and exceptions. Customer care stopped using the phrase activation crisis. Sales found something else to complain about because nature heals. Priya got promoted too. Her new title was Finance Business Partner, Operations. She claimed the title was too long to fit on a badge, but I noticed she didn't complain when people started inviting her to steering meetings earlier. She and I still worked together on cost models. She still asked for actuals, not commentary. Every once in a while, when someone proposed a vendor to solve a problem we already had an internal answer for, she would look at me across the room and tap her pen once against her notebook. Samir matured in the most annoying possible way, which is to say, he started quoting me back to myself. Any time a junior analyst wanted to blast someone in Slack, he would say, "Let the numbers travel through the channels nobody can call emotional." The first time I heard him say it, I told him I regretted mentoring him. He said that sounded like poor knowledge transfer. The folder still exists. It's bigger now. Not because I'm waiting for another Martin, though I've learned never to bet against corporate hiring. It's bigger because every tool we build has a story, and every story needs receipts. Approval emails, change tickets, logs, cost models, exception reports, the boring things. The things that don't feel powerful until someone tries to rewrite history. Sometimes people ask me whether I planned the whole thing from the moment Martin sent the Friday email. The honest answer is no. I planned to protect the team. I planned to document the risk. I planned to comply exactly enough that nobody could say I had created the failure. The revenge, if you want to call it that, came from refusing to rescue him from the consequences he had been warned about. That's the cleanest kind, in my opinion. Not because it's easy. It's not. It cost weeks of stress, a formal write-up, a backlog that hurt real customers, and a lot of people doing exhausting manual work while the organization learned an expensive lesson. If I could have made Martin listen on day one, I would have. I gave him the off-ramp. More than once. He didn't take it. He wanted the tool dead because he hadn't approved it. In the end, the company approved it without him. The vendor quote died in procurement. My write-up disappeared from HR. Priya's slide became a training example in finance, and Martin became one of those names people mention only when explaining why a control exists. There's a line in the current automation review checklist that makes me smile every time I see it. Before decommissioning any production automation, control owner must document throughput impact, rollback plan, customer impact, and replacement cost. Replacement cost. 2 words. Very boring, very expensive, if ignored. And every time a new manager asks why that line is there, someone eventually tells them about the head of compliance who didn't trust black boxes he didn't approve, and the free automation he killed on a Friday afternoon.